Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Abigail Kemp? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Abigail Kemp grew up in Marietta, Georgia, with her parents Connie and Stephen and her older sister Caitlin. They lived in a $1 million home set on 2 acres. When Abigail became a teenager, she started to rebel. She attended Kennesaw Mountain High School. She played basketball and softball, but was kicked off of the teams for being unkind. It appears as though she was rude to authority figures. She was expelled from the high school during her senior year. After this, she attended Hill Grove High School in Smyrna, Georgia. She continued to get in trouble frequently. Abigail often traveled to downtown Atlanta to hang out with a group of people her friends referred to as a sketchy crowd. She was described as liking danger, ignoring people, and doing whatever she wanted to. In 2010, she was arrested for underage drinking. She served 10 days of community service and had to participate in a drinking control program. It apparently was successful because in 2011, she demonstrated control of another drink. She was arrested for underage drinking at a party. The state decided not to prosecute this charge. Later in 2011, Abigail worked at Twin Peaks and Hooters. She allegedly attacked a coworker at Hooters on November 12 and was arrested for battery. The coworker said that Abigail attacked her from behind, kicking her and hitting her face. It appears as though Abigail wanted to be a model based on images that she uploaded to Facebook in 2012. She was also a quarterback on a lingerie football team called Atlanta Steam, at least according to her social media posts. Abigail started dating a 35-year-old man named Lewis Jones. She moved into an apartment in Smyrna, Georgia. The apartment was in her name only, but apparently Lewis lived there from time to time. Before we move to the timeline of the crime, let's hear a word from today's sponsor, Policy Genius. To properly provide for their families, most people need 10 times the life insurance coverage that they get through their employer. Policy Genius makes it easy to compare quotes from over a dozen top insurers all in one place. Why compare? You could save 50% or more on life insurance by comparing quotes with Policy Genius. You could save $1,300 or more per year on life insurance by using Policy Genius to compare policies. Eligible applicants can get covered in as little as a week, thanks to an award-winning policy option that swaps the standard medical exam requirement for a simple phone call. This exclusive policy was recently rated #1 by Forbes Advisor. Getting started is easy. First, head to policygenius.com/Dr. Grande. In minutes, you can work out how much life insurance coverage you need and compare personalized quotes to find your best price. When you're ready to apply, the Policy Genius team will handle the paperwork and scheduling for free. Policy Genius doesn't add on extra fees. Head to policygenius.com/Dr. Grande to get started right now. Policy Genius. When it comes to insurance, it's nice to get it right. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On April 28, 2015, Abigail robbed a jewelry store in Woodstock, Georgia. She was assisted by Lewis and 2 brothers, Larry and Michael Gilmore. The robbers made off with about $850,000 in merchandise. After this point, Abigail would go in alone to commit the robberies. Her conspirators functioned as lookouts. On August 5, she robbed a jewelry store in Dawsonville, Georgia, for $13,000 in jewelry. Just 5 days later, she robbed another store in Panama City Beach, Florida. The take here was almost $700,000. On September 2, she robbed a store in Bluffton, South Carolina, making off with $927,000 in jewelry. On October 15, she took $900,000 worth of merchandise during a robbery in Sevierville, Tennessee. On December 30, she attempted to rob a store in Georgia, but a UPS driver entered the store and disrupted her plan. Her last robbery was on January 4, 2016, in Maubin, North Carolina. Here she left with over $900,000 worth of merchandise. The MO for the robberies was similar across the crimes. Abigail brandished a pistol, forced the staff into a back room, and restrained them with zip ties. Her 3 conspirators, again, functioned as lookouts. The FBI released images of Abigail captured on surveillance video. Friends of Abigail recognized her and called the FBI. In addition to recognizing her face, they also pointed out that Abigail was wearing jewelry that she could not afford. So they had seen her wearing this jewelry, and there was no explanation for how she got it. Not long after being identified, Abigail Kemp and Lewis Jones were arrested in her apartment. Lewis was already wanted by the FBI for 2 bank robberies. Abigail and her conspirators had stolen about $4.3 million in jewelry. None of it was recovered. Abigail would eventually testify against her 3 male conspirators as part of a plea deal with the government. During her testimony, she explained her involvement in the robberies. Abigail said that she first met the 3 men when she was working as a waitress in 2012. She became romantically involved with Lewis. In 2015, the men recruited her into the robbery enterprise. They talked her into becoming a criminal. They made her feel good about herself. She didn't like what she was doing, but she liked the way they made her feel. Essentially, she was arguing that she was impressionable and was manipulated by these sophisticated criminals. After being recruited and committing the first robbery, the 3 men trained Abigail extensively in a window tint shop in Atlanta owned by the Gilmore brothers. They wanted her to be able to commit the robberies alone. They studied the floor plan of the stores, identified the jewelry they were going to steal, and they trained Abigail on how to use the pistol and restrain employees. Abigail wore an earpiece so she could communicate with them during the robbery. Abigail said that she only kept about $30,000 from the robberies. Again, she had stolen about $4.3 million in jewelry. Abigail said that she would give the men the jewelry, her clothes, and the gun. They would travel to Miami and sell the jewelry as she drove back to Marietta, Georgia. The men would later contact her and say they ran into a problem with the jewelry. Some of it was fake or marked. They couldn't sell much of it. So they were giving her excuses about why they couldn't come up with the money. Abigail claimed that the men were armed and ready to intervene if something went wrong during the robberies, but she said she never actually saw them with the guns. She also never saw them meet anybody in Miami. Again, she would head back to Georgia when they went to Miami. The prosecution had evidence to corroborate some of Abigail's story, including hotel records, text conversations, the locations of cell phones, and images from cell phones. The defense attorneys for the conspirators argued that Abigail was already a criminal when she began committing robberies. She was lying about the men simply to get a reduced sentence. She was facing life in prison before the plea deal. In the end, Lewis Jones, Larry Gilmore, and Michael Gilmore were found guilty of several conspiracy charges. All 3 of the men received a sentence of 32 years in prison. Abigail was sentenced to just 10 years in prison after pleading guilty to 2 counts of brandishing a firearm during a crime of violence and 6 counts of interfering with commerce by threat. At her sentencing, she told the judge that she wanted to study theology while in prison and help other inmates. She was sorry about what she did. Not a day went by when she didn't think about the victims. Now moving to my analysis. The perpetrators of armed robberies are almost always men. To see a woman operating alone in this capacity is highly unusual. To see a woman committing these crimes while not wearing a mask is even more unusual. I'm not sure what the plan here was for Abigail or her conspirators. They would have to have known that the jewelry stores had cameras, yet Abigail walked into the stores and made no real attempt to disguise her identity. On at least one occasion, she looked directly at a camera. It's hard to understand how a robbery scheme that was based on certain so-called sophisticated elements, like casing the stores and having an escape plan, would forget about wearing a mask. It's like they were holding a robbery checklist, but their thumb was covering the first item, which read, "Wear a mask." These individuals were comically bad at planning robberies if their object was to never get caught. If they wanted to get caught after stealing merchandise with a high dollar value, they were successful, but usually getting away is part of a criminal plan. It's like they were inspired by the level of competence from Mission Impossible, but ended up with the criminal sophistication from Fargo. In exchange for revealing her identity, Abigail did retain one advantage over most armed robbers. The people in the stores had no idea they were about to get robbed. They were taken completely by surprise. This probably helped her to get away with some of the crimes in the short run, like she could initiate the robbery before someone had a chance to call the police. What could have happened in a case like this? What could motivate a person to do this? This is just my theory. Of course, I don't know what her motivation was. As I mentioned, Abigail's story is that she was corrupted by these older, experienced criminals. She liked the idea of making some money, and committing robberies was very exciting for her, but of course now she is full of remorse. This ostensible motive appears to ignore the fact that Abigail was already on a bad path before she met Lewis Jones and the Gilmore brothers. She had been arrested several times and was described in a manner consistent with grandiose narcissism, like being arrogant, condescending, and selfish. She was also described in a way consistent with certain antisocial characteristics, like being reckless, impulsive, and dangerous. It would seem that what the conspirators offered her was exactly what she was looking for, a chance to escalate criminal activity to another level. She appeared to have a blatant disregard for societal norms. Not only did she fail to wear a mask, she wore some of the jewelry in front of her acquaintances. It's like she believed she was invincible. She would never be caught. She had an amazing level of confidence. Moving to the next question, what would justice look like in this case? Was 10 years in prison enough? Abigail's crime spree left a few of her victims traumatized. One reported having to receive counseling, and one jewelry store owner said that a few of his employees never came back to work. I imagine Abigail's behavior shattered their sense of security and safety. On the other side, Abigail testified against her conspirators and showed remorse. I think the deal was fair. 10 years in federal prison is a tough sentence. In the federal system, the maximum amount of time off for good behavior is 54 days a year. Assuming she stays out of trouble, she could be released in about 8.5 years. When she gets out, she has another 3 years of probation to serve, and she has to pay back $1.5 million in restitution to the victims. Likely this will never happen, but there's a minimum charge that she has to pay each month of $150. The judge ordered her to receive cognitive behavioral therapy and a 10-day substance abuse treatment program while in prison. Perhaps she can figure out where things went wrong and try to rebuild her life. Abigail has gone out of her way to destroy her prospects for the future, but at least she will get out of prison someday. It's not clear if her conspirators ever will, considering they will have to live to about 70 or 80 in order to serve their time. As far as Abigail's plan for prison, I find it interesting how some defendants, when they are sentenced to prison, talk about how they're going to help other inmates. Perhaps this is just because there are not a lot of things to do in prison, so it's not like they can say they're going to build a business, like open a nonprofit or something. They're fairly restricted in what they can actually do in prison. But either way, I find it curious. She said she was going to study theology and assist her fellow inmates. This may be connected to narcissism. Abigail believes that even though she's just starting a sentence for committing several felonies, she is somehow in a position to help other people in prison. It would appear that, even in prison, she's too good for the other people around her. What lessons can we learn in this case? I have 3 here. Number 1, excitement seeking can be a dangerous characteristic if it cannot be satisfied in some pro-social way, like skydiving or firefighting. For some people, only crime will scratch that itch. Number 2, if somebody is arrested several times when they are young, some type of intervention is warranted. Looking at any one of her offenses when she was young, her behavior didn't seem to be too bad. Obviously, when she got to the robberies, it was bad, but not before that. But when taking a look at the big picture, she was clearly out of control and headed for more serious charges. Number 3, I find it interesting that she was arrested so many times before, and yet she still thought she could get away with committing the robberies. It's almost as though her belief came from her feelings. She was not responding to the evidence in her environment. It was not based on learning. Perhaps she maintained an irrational belief based on extremely high self-confidence and a belief that she was better than other people. When people believe they are immune from the consequences due to narcissism or for any reason, they are particularly dangerous. Those are my thoughts in the case of Abigail Kemp. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.